All right. Welcome everyone. I hope I'm audible, online students. In our previous lecture हमने क्या डिस्कस किया था? Jainism, right? उसके teachings of philosophy, उसका significance. We need to contemporary relevance also. We need to do the same for Buddhism as well, right? So first of all, the teachings and philosophy of Buddhism. क्या है most prominent teaching of Buddhism? The Chatur Arya Satyas, or the Four Noble Truths. What are these? Dukkha, Samudaya, Nirodh, and Marg or Magga. Right? What is Dukkha? That the world is full of suffering or sorrow. That is a basic reality. Okay? Then Samudaya, that is the explanation for this suffering. What is the explanation of suffering? What is the main cause of suffering? Attachment, desire, right? The root cause of suffering is desire or Krishna. Okay. How to end suffering? By extinguishing the flame of desire. Okay? Suffering can be ended by extinguishing desire. And how to extinguish the flame of desire? What is the path? The eightfold path. That is the Ashtangika Marg. By following the Ashtangika Marg, desire can be ended, and with the end of desire, suffering can also be stopped. Also known as the eightfold path or the middle path. Right? What are the components? Right vision, right resolve, right speech, right concentration, right recollection, right livelihood, right effort, and right meditation. ठीक है? So, does Buddha emphasize upon the performance of any rituals, performing any kind of pilgrimage, getting associated with any kind of priests? No. Acquiring any specialized type of knowledge, reading any specific scripture? No. ये सब कुछ नहीं करने के लिए बोला. He simply said, do all these things. These are things that you do not require any specific knowledge for. ठीक है? And that is the path to salvation. When it comes to the nature of God, what did Buddha say? Does God exist or not? He did not say anything. The Buddha remained silent. When it came to the existence and nature of God. Okay? So here, is he playing the same tune as the Upanishads or is he saying something completely different? Upanishads क्या बोलते हैं? They emphasize upon the existence of a monotheistic God, that is Brahma. यहाँ पे क्या है? He has remained silent. ठीक है? And therefore, he not only deviates very sharply from the Upanishadic thought, it is also considered Buddhism is therefore considered to be an agnostic or atheist doctrine. So either God does not exist or he does not matter. ठीक है? Regarding the nature of the universe, what did Buddha say? If there is no God, can the universe have been created by God? No, it could not have been created by God. Could it be destroyed by God? No. Therefore, universe should be permanent, right? But that is not the case. Okay? According to Buddhism, the universe has been created and will be destroyed. Therefore, it is temporary and destructible. While it exists, does it remain stable or is it constantly changing? It is also constantly changing. So it is in a constant state of flux. And what explains the creation, destruction, and constant change in the universe if Buddha has remained silent on the divine agency behind this? If God is not the force acting behind the creation or destruction or change in the universe, तो कोई दूसरा force होना चाहिए, right? And what is that? That is प्रतीत्य समुत्पाद और डिपेंडेंट को क्रिएशन और डिपेंडेंट origination. According to this philosophy, all changes are linked to each other by a cause effect relationship. So something new emerges out of the interaction of other things, on in a 12-step process. Starting point क्या होता है हमेशा? The desire for something, which results in its creation, and ultimately it causes sorrow, it causes suffering. And what regulates this pratitya samutpad? जो रूट कॉज है इसका वो डिजायर है, हमेशा डिजायर से ही सब चीज ओरिजिनेट होती है. बट व्हाट induces the changes to take place in a certain manner? It is karma, ठीक है, or action. So it is regulated by karma or action. So attainment of salvation also depends on karma only. Karma is the only way, or action is the only way to destroy desire, thus ending this cycle of creation, destruction and co-creation. ठीक है? Regarding the nature of the soul or atma, क्या बोला बुद्धा ने? Soul exists, but it dies. It is mortal. It is not immortal. ठीक है? Once again, in a major way, he deviated from the Upanishadic philosophy. Upanishadic philosophy क्या बोलता है? Soul is immortal. It is the medium of transmigration, birth and rebirth का medium वही है, right? And soul is part of Paramatma or Brahma. Both are indistinct. Buddha has denied the existence of both Paramatma or Brahma as well as the Atma or soul. ठीक है? According to Buddhism, the soul is mortal and dies with the body. In this case, should rebirth be possible? It should not be possible. But rebirth does take place. How? According to him, it is not the soul, but the consciousness or chetna which becomes the medium of transmigration. He explained transmigration through an analogy. क्या बोला इन्होंने? You have a candle, and before you blow it out, you transfer the flame onto another candle. Then you blow that out. The first candle is now unlit, but the second candle is lit. कोई मैटर का ट्रांसमाइग्रेशन हुआ है? नहीं हुआ. इट इज सिंपली दी एनर्जी और दी चेतना और कॉन्शियसनेस विच हैज मूव फ्रॉम वन फॉर्म टू दी अदर. एंड इसको रेगुलेट क्या कर रहा है और इसके पीछे कॉज क्या है, प्रिंसिपल क्या है? once again the same one, pratitya samutpad, and it is regulated by karma once again. ठीक है? So it occurs through the process of pratitya samutpad with desire being the root cause. ठीक है? It is regulated once again by karma. ठीक है? And thus the path to salvation lies where? In the regulatory mechanism, that is karma. ठीक है? और एक्शन जिसका फाइनल ऑब्जेक्टिव क्या होना चाहिए? टू extinguish the flame of desire. And over here, what is the best kind of action to extinguish the flame of desire? The Ashtangika Marg. Was prescribed as the only way to do this. Good evening, Shubhranil. I'm good. I hope you're also well. ठीक है? तो ये हो गए टीचिंग्स एंड फिलॉसफी ऑफ बुद्धिज्म. क्लियर है इतना? What is the significance of Buddhist thought? बताइए. First of all, it provided an effective challenge to Brahmanism. How? It rejected the social order prescribed by Brahmanism. How else? It also challenged Brahmanical supremacy at an ideological level, right? How else? It adopted a more tolerant attitude towards the underprivileged sections, especially women and Shudras. और कैसे? How else? It challenged the efficacy of rituals in order to attain salvation. ठीक है? और क्या सिग्निफिकेंस हो सकता है इसका? Buddhism also ultimately emerged as a major intellectual and cultural movement. How? A number of new philosophical innovations were made. For example, rejecting the Upanishadic concepts of Atma and Paramatma, Atma and Brahma. These were the central philosophical specimens, or you can say artifacts of the Upanishadic philosophy. तो उनको रिजेक्ट कर दिया. Culturally, what was the importance of Buddhism? It birthed a major literary and artistic movement which would continue to flourish for several centuries. So, Pali literature, Sanskrit drama, and even painting or sculpture or cave architecture, that would all begin with Buddhism only. Right? Thirdly, it did not remain confined to India and in fact became a major world religion through which Indian influence as well as culture was exported overseas. ठीक है? It emerged as a major world religion and thus became the medium to export Indian influence and culture. It enhanced both the soft and hard power of India. ठीक है? Further, it also played a prominent political role. कैसे? बताइए. Did it contribute to Magad emerging as the most powerful of the Mahajanpadas or not? Yes. Did it play a major role in allowing Ashok to integrate his vast empire because it had a deep impact on his philosophy of Dhamma? True or not? Okay. So it played an important role in contemporary politics. For example, it helped Magad emerge as the most powerful Mahajanpad. Next example, through its influence on Ashoka's Dhamma, it allowed Ashok to consolidate control over his vast and diverse empire to a mixture of tolerance, pacifism, and welfareism. ठीक है? Further, it also played a very important role in challenging priestly domination within society, right? So it helped challenge priestly domination. How? By rejecting the efficacy of ritualism and emphasizing upon the importance of individual effort and dynamic agency to attain salvation. By emphasizing upon individual effort and dynamic agency of the individual rather than priestly intervention or interference to attain salvation. So the keys to the doors of heaven, which were earlier in the hands of the priestly class, he took them from the priestly class and handed it over to the ordinary individual. ठीक है? Further, it successfully resolved the prevailing socio-religious and economic conflicts of the day by providing a flexible set of practical solutions. मतलब क्या हुआ? He did not insist upon the extremities of penance and renunciation. He said if somebody wants to become a renunciant, very good. Somebody does not want to become a renunciant, even better. You can live your life as a grihasthya, that means a householder, or a gahapati, or a shreshtin, and still be a good practicing Buddhist simply by observing the eightfold path. So for that, renunciation is not a necessity. This allowed those who had been left behind in the rat race of economic growth to join the Sangha, get social respectability, and those who were more successful to derive the benefits of spiritual nourishment through their association with Buddhism. So the lay followers, were integrated into the community of rigid practitioners through a medium of exchange, interchange. The lay practitioners would be expected to provide alms to the monks. The richer ones would be expected to give donations to the Sangha, in return for which they would get a spiritual merit. It would be a good act which would take them closer to the goal of salvation. While those other ones, or the renunciants, who were either fed up with worldly affairs or were not in a position to, let us say, constructively contribute to living a good fulfilling life in the mainstream society, उनको एक दूसरा ऑप्शन मिल गया. Join the Sangha, you'll get a lot of respect. ठीक है? So this allowed the doctrine of Buddhism to successfully resolve the prevailing socio-religious and economic conflicts. उसका basis अब खत्म हो जाएगा. Further, it meant different things for different people. For the trading community, it did not restrict usury. That means lending money on interest. So that was allowed. That was not kind of bad karma. In fact, that was encouraged within Buddhism. For farmers, killing of pests and animals was not kind of violence. तो extreme non-violence नहीं था. तो सब अलग-अलग लोगों के लिए अलग-अलग चीजें mean करेगा, and that is why it was so successful, because it was able to provide workable, practical, and flexible solutions to a large cross section of the population. ठीक है? The principles of Buddhism also remain highly relevant in the modern world. there is a high degree of modern relevance also. बताइए क्या हो सकता है ये? The idea of non-violence towards both human and animal life. Its emphasis upon the importance of scientific thinking, that means critical thinking, in order to question the established norms in society and politics. This is very important in democratic societies. How? Democratic societies में जो institutions हैं, they are expected to work in order to benefit the people. If people themselves close their eyes and do not maintain a check on these institutions are going to become despotic and tyrannical. ठीक है? So importance of critical thinking and having a scientific temper, these are emphasized upon. What else? The idea of the middle path, that is avoiding the extremities of both renunciation as well as enjoyment. बीच में रहना है. ये कहाँ पे आप फिट कर सकते हो? ओवर कंजम्पशन नहीं होना चाहिए, ओवर accumulation of wealth is not very useful, right? These kinds of things. So the idea of the middle path may be useful from the perspective of sustainable development, resolving inequality, then also environmental degradation, etc. Right? So, हाँ, क्या चीज? यूजुरी को एक्सेप्टेंस मिला तो इट वाज बेनिफिशियल फॉर द इकोनॉमी. तो देखो, यहाँ पे हमने उस इस वाले में पॉइंट में ये सारी चीजें कवर कर ली हैं. That because Brahmanism was not being able to provide the solutions to all these problems that were emerging in society, because Brahmanism was restricting many of those activities or enforcing some practices that were harmful for the society, for the various social groups, for the economy. That is why Buddhism was more successful in providing an alternative. So it was able to resolve conflict within the society to a large extent. तो उसमें आप मेंशन कर सकते हो that it also played a very important role in inducing the second urbanization, rapid economic growth के पीछे भी बुद्धिज्म का हाथ है, because it was flexible and practical. It did not require individuals and groups to work against their core interests. Brahmanism में क्या हो रहा था? Farmers were being forced to sacrifice their cattle. They did not want to do this. Buddhism provided them an alternative. Result was larger surplus, greater growth, more urbanization. ठीक है? So वो इसी में हमने कवर कर लिया है इसको. ठीक है? So this is the significance of Buddhism as a doctrine. Now, despite this, there were some limitations. क्या limitations हैं? While it tried to challenge Brahmanism, it did not completely discard the social order, the Varna system. It simply repurposed it. ठीक है? It accepted the Varna-based division of society. Then later on, what would happen? With the emergence of Mahayana Buddhism, much of its early social reformist zeal would be lost, and it would assume many of the negative characteristics that it had been introduced to challenge, such as the use of Sanskrit, priestly domination, use of ritualism, even idol worship. All these things are going to get introduced. Write down. With the emergence of Mahayana Buddhism, it lost much of its unique identity and reformist zeal. और बताओ क्या प्रॉब्लम था इसमें? What was the attitude of Buddhism towards women? It was more tolerant as compared to Brahmanism, but did they see women as equals of men? No. So it was unable to entirely shed the negative attitudes towards women who continued to be considered inferior to men. Continued to be considered inferior to men. ठीक है? और कोई शॉर्टकमिंग और कोई लिमिटेशन बुद्धिज्म में? While it tried to challenge untouchability and slavery at an ideological level, did it do anything, any practical things in order to challenge those institutions? No. So, while Buddhism challenged untouchability and slavery at an ideological level, there was no practical challenge to it or to them. ठीक है? Further, to understand the significance of Buddhism, we must compare it to certain similar movements in other parts of the world, such as the Reformation movement in Europe from the 15th century onwards. Right? तो वहां पे क्या होगा? That would result in the emergence of modern European society. Would Buddhism have the same effect on Indian society? No. So it would remain a response to the evils of Brahmanism, but it would not have a permanent impact on the flow of Indian history. तो जो चैनल है इंडियन हिस्ट्री का, उसमें हो सकता है थोड़ा टर्बुलेंस क्रिएट हो गया, बट उसका डायरेक्शन चेंज नहीं कर पाया ये. दैट इज द आइडिया. तो अनलाइक the European Reformation, which brought about the emergence of modernity, comma, Buddhism was unable to effect such a change. It was simply a timely response to the evils of Brahmanism, but was unable to bring about a social revolution. Full stop. ठीक है, समझ में आया है इतना? Take down a question. Discuss the factors responsible for the emergence of Buddhism full stop. How far would it be correct to compare it to the European Reformation? Question. First portion of the question I think we'll be able to answer. Second में हो सकता है थोड़े problems हो, right? So, what is the basis for comparison? That both Buddhism as well as the Reformation have certain similarities. Namely, both of them were a form of protest against what? The religious, political, and social problems being faced by the contemporary societies. ठीक है? In the case of Buddhism, what were the specific set of factors? What were the religious problems? Excessive ritualism and priestly domination, the costly religious practice. And what about the Reformation? वहां पे भी same. The Catholic Church was emphasizing upon excessive ritualism, priestly domination, and costly religious practices, religious rituals, which were out of the grasp of ordinary people. Therefore, access to spiritual nourishment had become a matter of class. ठीक है? Further, both Buddhism as well as Reformation were also a cultural protest against a dominant culture that was being enforced by the prevalent religious and cultural forces. So, in the case of India, Brahmanical culture backed by which language? Sanskrit language. In Europe, the Catholic culture being propped up on the basis of, on the foundation of the Catholic Church, backed by which language? Latin. Okay? So, once again, use of classical languages इनके अगेंस्ट प्रोटेस्ट था. Both Buddhism as well as Reformation emphasized upon the use of colloquial languages, language of the masses. Politically, both stood for a protest against constant violence and excesses. ठीक है? Excesses of whom? The state backed by the priestly class, right? So in both cases, people were suffering from excessive taxation. They were suffering from frequent warfare, right? Etc. Social problems, kya? That both of these were protest movements against the discriminatory social order. ठीक है? Clear? So the environment in which both these movements emerged were quite similar, right? The kind of response that they gave was also quite similar. There is similarity in response also. कैसे? Both of them responded to the dominant religious and social structure through ideology and philosophy, through ideas and philosophy. So it was a philosophical response wherein both Buddhism and the Reformation rejected the basic ideology of the Brahmanical order and Catholic Church. Respectively. For example, Buddhism rejected what? The ideas of Atma, Paramatma, ritualism, etc. ठीक है? Whereas the Reformation rejected ideas such as the divinity of Christ, important Catholic practices such as confession, Eucharist, baptism, etc. ठीक है? फर्दर आगे बढ़े. Both also challenged the priest prince nexus, the unholy union between church and state, which was being used by the ruling class in order to oppress the commoners. In the case of Buddhism, ये चैलेंज का क्या फॉर्म था? It rejected the basis of Brahmanical legitimacy by denying the very concept of God. So if there is no God, there can be no custodian of God. तो ब्राह्मण्स का बेसिस ब्राह्मण्स को डिस्क्वालीफाई कर दिया. एंड इफ देयर इज नो गॉड, देयर कैन बी नो रूलर हु क्लेम्स दैट आई एम चोजन डायरेक्टली बाय गॉड. तो किंग्स का बेसिस भी डिनाई कर दिया. ठीक है. इन द केस ऑफ द रेफॉर्मेशन, it called for the rulers to assume all the powers of the church. They wanted to weaken the Catholic Church. क्या बोला? That the rulers are chosen by God, they have divine rights, and their rights cannot be taken away by any earthly power, even if it is the Catholic Church. ठीक है. So both of them were trying to destroy the priest-prince nexus. The way in which they tried to do it may have been different. Clear है? Both also induced similar changes. For example, both would emerge in the form of heterodox movements against the dominant doctrine. Okay? So both took the shape of heterodox doctrines. Both of these induced or invited a reaction from the dominant sects, from the orthodox philosophies. Okay? Both received a backlash from the orthodox sects. And in the case of both, this backlash would induce political conflict. So in the case of Europe, क्या देखने के लिए मिलेगा? The 100 Years War. And in the case of Buddhism, क्या देखने के लिए मिलेगा? The conflict between the various powers in different parts of the world on the base of India on the basis of religion. ठीक है? In the post-Mauryan period specifically. For example, conflict between the Satavahanas and the Kalingas, the Shakas and the Satavahanas, the Yavanas and the Satavahanas, the Kushans and the Satavahanas, right? Oh, sorry, Kushans and the Yavanas and Shakas. ये सब देखने के लिए मिलता है. Right? Then both of these also triggered economic growth. ठीक है. तो ये हो गए दोनों के बीच में similarities. However, this is not the end of the story. If the similarities were considerable, so were the dissimilarities. तो बुद्धिज्म को इंडियन फॉर्म ऑफ रेफॉर्मेशन क्यों नहीं बोला जा सकता है? First of all, Buddhism and Reformation were protest movements against the orthodoxy. But Buddhism, unlike Protestantism, was not a protest movement against an institution. It was a protest movement against a very way of life. The Protestant movement, Reformation, was a protest against the Catholic Church. Buddhism was a protest against the Brahmanical social order. ठीक है, तो कोई एक टारगेट नहीं था उसका. ठीक है, एक तो इसलिए नहीं कंसिडर करना चाहिए एज द इंडियन वर्जन ऑफ रेफॉर्मेशन. सेकेंडली, बुद्धिज्म and the Protestant movement were different because of their philosophical thrusts as well. Philosophies दोनों की completely different है. For example, while Buddhism rejects the concept of God and soul, Protestantism क्या बोलता है? God and soul exist. They are the God is the creator of the universe. ठीक है, ये सब बोलता है. Further, the way in which Buddhism and the Protestant movement tried to break the priest-prince nexus, that was also very different. Buddhism ने किसको अटैक किया? दोनों, priests को as well as princes को, right? And what about the Protestant movement? They attacked only the priestly class of the Catholic Church. They tried to strengthen the European kings, European princes. So Buddhism, or the strategy for ending the priest-prince nexus was different in both. By denying the existence of God, Buddhism was denying the legitimacy to both the priestly class as well as the princely class. Whereas in the case of Europe, Reformation क्या कर रहा था? It was encouraging the princes to take over all the powers of the Catholic Church, the political power that it enjoyed, to diminish its role in the society. Okay? That is what was happening. Further, while the Reformation resulted in the end of feudalism in Europe. Was Buddhism able to induce any such socio-economic and political changes in the case of India? No. So the Protestant movement finally contributed to the end of European feudalism. Contributing to the emergence of modern nation states. Buddhism was unable to induce any such changes. Okay. Further, while the Protestant movement resulted in the emergence of a permanent split within the Catholic community, or it splintered. The Catholic world permanently. Was Buddhism able to achieve the same? No. So although Buddhism emerged as a major world religion, within India, what would happen later on? It would become indistinguishable almost from the dominant Brahmanical cult. Brahmanism itself would evolve, but Buddhism would also evolve, and ultimately both are going to have the same features or similar features. Buddhism would lose its unique identity. Protestant movement में ऐसा नहीं देखने के लिए मिलेगा. Permanently, even now, if you ask Christians, so they will say either I'm a Protestant or a Catholic. This is not the case with regards to Buddhism. Buddhism in India is now a largely dead religion. Okay? Further, the scale of violence unleashed by the Protestant movement was several orders of degrees larger than that induced by the emergence of Buddhism. It was extremely violent. Okay? In the name of religion, a lot of bloodshed would be done in Europe during the 16th and 17th centuries. And this may be due to the insistence of Buddhism on non-violence, whereas no such limitation being imposed by the Reformation, by the Protestant movement. और प्रोटेस्टेंटिज्म में ऐसा कुछ नहीं होगा. ठीक है. Come back to the question. Discuss the factors responsible for the emergence of Buddhism. How far would it be correct to compare it to the European Reformation? तो conclude कैसे करेंगे इसको? What can be a valid way to conclude this answer? Huh? So while both of them shared some remarkable similarities, but they took place in completely different contexts and time periods in the world. Therefore, while some parallels may be drawn, it cannot be said to have anticipated the European Reformation. After all, the Reformation was able to introduce or induce the birth of modern Europe, whereas no such changes took place with regards to India. Okay? So the content of the European Reformation seen objectively was far more revolutionary than Buddhism. Buddhism को हम एक बोल सकते हैं social protest था, but Reformation was able to bring about a social revolution, right? So that is the note on which we can conclude. हो जाएगा ये? ठीक है, तो ये तो हो गया बुद्धिज्म. सॉरी शुभ्रानिल, मैंने मिस कर दिया आपका ये वाला मैसेज. वायलेंस एंड यू आर आस्किंग, तो कहाँ पे किस वाले सेक्शन में पूछा था आपने? इसी पेज पर? वायलेंस एंड एक्सेसेस. वायलेंस एंड एक्सेसेस, ठीक है. तो एक्सेस कमिट करने का मतलब कि जितना रिक्वायरमेंट है उससे ज्यादा किसी को एक्सप्लॉइट करना या जुल्म करना. ऑलराइट, ठीक है. ये हो गया बुद्धिज्म एंड इट्स सिग्निफिकेंस, कंपैरिजन विद द प्रोटेस्टेंट मूवमेंट और द यूरोपियन रेफॉर्मेशन. नेक्स्ट हमें क्या करना है डिस्कस? Upanishadic thought. What were the factors responsible for the emergence of Upanishadic thought? Same as Buddhism and Jainism. Upanishadic thought, however, emerged before the emergence of Buddhism and Jainism. तो उनसे ज़्यादा पुराना है. The emergence of Upanishadic thought began with what? The eastward migration of Aryans. ठीक है. कब हुआ ये? This process took place when? During the later Vedic age. महाजनपद एज के पहले, ठीक है. During the later Vedic age. Why do you think that eastward migration would have resulted in changes in philosophy? Philosophical innovation को कैसे इंड्यूस कर सकता है ये? Because it brought about major changes. कहां पर? Changes in the economy, society, polity and religion में it would induce major changes. And whenever major human systems change, some people are going to benefit, others are going to lose out. What is this going to lead to? Conflict within the society. ठीक है? These changes would induce conflict and upheaval. We have already seen the nature of these changes. Economy में क्या change हो रहा था? That would result in conflict. Inequality was rising. Religion में priestly domination, ritualism was rising. Society में discrimination was rising. The treatment of women was getting worse. Varna mobility was getting reduced, right? Freedoms enjoyed by the Shudras were being restricted. Polity mein, what would be the conflict-inducing changes? the emergence of territorial kingdoms, janpads, right, who would be constantly warring against each other to gain more territory, right? So the nature of these changes was that it induced economic growth, but also economic inequality, social change, but also more discrimination, religious change, but also more ritualism, priestly domination, political change, but also more conflict. Okay? And therefore, the emergence of Upanishadic thought was a philosophical response to these changes, to these conflict inducing changes. Okay? During the Mahajanpat period, what would happen? Would this conflict go away or would it increase even further? It would increase even further, right? Because the same processes have now accelerated even further. During the phase of second urbanization, this conflict intensified. And as a result, the philosophical response is also going to get intensified. क्लियर है? क्या लिखा है अभी आपने? The emergence of Upanishadic thought began with the eastward migration of Aryans during the later Vedic age. Next point, write down. This induced conflict and upheaval by bringing about economic inequality, social stratification, the emergence of territorial territorial kingdoms that were constantly at war and excessive ritualism and priestly domination in the field of religion, Full stop. Next subpoint लिखो. The earliest Upanishads represented a philosophical response to these changes and conflicts. Full stop. Next main point. As these conflicts intensified during the Mahajanpad age, the development of Upanishadic thought in response to it also accelerated. accelerated. ठीक है, तो ये तो हो गए फैक्टर्स. दीज आर इन फैक्ट द सेम सेट ऑफ फैक्टर्स व्हिच एक्सप्लेन द इमर्जेंस ऑफ बुद्धिज्म एंड जैनिज्म. उसको लिखने का एक दूसरा तरीका है. नाउ द फीचर्स ऑफ उपनिषदिक थॉट. बताइए. Are the Upanishads going to justify and defend ritualism? Are they going to promote ritualism, or are they going to try and reject it? Try to reject it. So they were anti-ritualism. For example, the Chandogya Upanishad, which was one of the earlier Upanishads, this refers to rituals as broken vessels और broken boats. ठीक है, तो जैसे ब्रोकन बोट्स, टूटी हुई नाव, आपको एक छोर से दूसरे छोर तक नहीं ले जा सकती हैं. सिमिलरली these rituals cannot take a human being from the mundane towards the spiritual, so they cannot help an individual attain salvation. लिखो. they reject rituals as the path to salvation, by arguing that rituals are like broken vessels and cannot help an individual attain salvation. The Chandogya Upanishad, in fact, has a story in which a group of priests are performing a big yagya, and what they are doing is that they have built a huge sacrificial fire and उसकी परिक्रमा कर रहे हैं. They are going round and round in circles. तो एक कुत्ता आ जाता है वहां पर, right? And the dog starts looking and seeing very curiously. तो थोड़ी देर में one of the priests gets irritated, उसको पत्थर मार के वहां से भगा देता है. एनीवे, द रिचुअल इज कंक्लूडेड एंड नाउ द डॉग ऑल्सो स्टार्ट्स टू गो राउंड एंड राउंड अराउंड द सर्किल. तो आइडिया ये है कि the same kind of result that the dog is going to get from going around and around the circles, the same result priests are also going to get. ठीक है, तो कोई असर नहीं होगा इन सारे रिचुअल्स का. तो they do not have any efficacy. That is the idea over here. So if ritualism is not to be the basis of salvation, क्या होना चाहिए basis of salvation? Knowledge, ideas, कर्मा नहीं. ठीक है, so they have in fact said that knowledge is the path to salvation. This is known as ज्ञान मार्ग। कैसे? अकॉर्डिंग टू देम, गॉड एंड सोल are they distinct or are they the same? They are the same. Aham brahmasmi, right? Are indistinct. But they appear to be distinct. Why? Because of illusion or maya. And we are not able to pierce this curtain of illusion, this maya, because of our ignorance. Okay? So how can we attain oneness with God, attain salvation? By shattering this illusion, this maya, the feeling, the idea that God and soul are distinct, right? कि अलग अलग है, ये रियलाइजेशन करना जरूरी होता है। और रियलाइजेशन कैसे आएगा? विद नॉलेज। बट अपीयर टू बी डिस्टिंक्ट ड्यू टू illusion or maya. And we are unable to shatter this illusion due to ignorance or agyan. And therefore, the path to salvation lies in the acquisition of knowledge or gyan. How? To a process of नॉलेज कहां से मिलेगा? अंदर से मिलेगा, बाहर से मिलेगा? दोनों जगह से मिलेगा। थ्रू अ प्रोसेस ऑफ ऑब्जर्वेशन, सेल्फ रिफ्लेक्शन एंड इनर डिस्कवरी। पूजा पाठ करके मिलेगा ये ज्ञान? नहीं मिलेगा। दान पुण्य करके नहीं मिलेगा। पंडित जी से दक्षिणा लेके, दीक्षा लेके नहीं मिलने वाला है, राइट? सो द आइडिया इज दैट it is by learning the Vedic thought, by learning the Upanishadic thought, and by applying it to look inwards, so that your divine self can reveal itself to you, right? So self reflection and inner discovery, they are the most important portions. तो यहाँ पे एक realization होता है. This is not some knowledge that you can acquire from an external source, that is going to take you only so far. Concepts clear कर सकता है, but जो बाकी के journey है, you have to take up on your own. ठीक है? So the importance of gurus etc is only limited over here. वो आपको knowledge दे सकते हैं, but then you will have to conduct the rest of the journey on your own. That is the idea over here, right? तो अभी बताओ कि अगर एम्फेसिस रिचुअलिज्म पे नहीं है तो कहां पे हो रहा है? फिलॉसफी पर, राइट? तो उपनिषदिक थॉट रिप्रेजेंट्स अ फिलोसॉफिकल मूवमेंट wherein the composers of the Upanishads try to ask and answer important questions such as the nature and existence of God, the soul, the universe, the relationship between them, the idea of salvation or moksha, and the path to salvation. The concept of birth and rebirth, transmigration of the soul, etc. ये सब पूछेंगे. क्या? उपनिषदिक थॉट डज इट बिलीव इन कर्मा? तो कर्मा इनके लिए यही है, सेल्फ रिफ्लेक्शन एंड इनर डिस्कवरी. तो reflection into your static self, so meditation, these kinds of exercises, that is only going to be their form of karma. Karma को ये नहीं बोलेंगे that because of good karma or bad karma you are being born in as a particular life form, so you are being punished for your previous births. ये idea बाद में उसमें introduce कर दिया जाएगा, right? And why? Who is going to introduce that? Philosophers or priests? Priests क्या बोलेंगे? That you are poor in this life, you are abused in this life because you have committed certain sins in your previous lives. You have been born as a Shudra in this life, as a woman in this life, because you committed certain sins when you were born as an upper caste male in the previous life, right? This is your punishment. If you want to have a good future life, then give me money, I'll do this ritual for you. Okay? So idea of karma is going to be introduced into the Upanishadic philosophy आफ्टर द रिवाइवल ऑफ रिचुअलिज्म. तो हमेशा जो मूवमेंट चल रहे हैं ना, दे आर नेवर गोइंग टू बी एबल टू ओवर पावर अ पर्टिकुलर सेट ऑफ प्रैक्टिसेस और वैल्यूज. हमेशा इनके बीच में टग ऑफ वॉर होता रहेगा, गिव एंड टेक चलता रहेगा. दे आर गोइंग टू ऑल्सो अडॉप्ट सर्टेन फीचर्स फ्रॉम अदर स्ट्रीम्स एंड अडेप्ट टू द इवॉल्विंग सिचुएशंस एज वेल. ठीक है? तो वो बाद में इमर्ज होगा, ओरिजिनली नहीं था. दे रिजेक्टेड कॉन्सेप्ट सच एज कर्मा एटसेट्रा, उसका कोई मतलब नहीं रहता है. अच्छा, फर्दर Upanishadic thought also emphasizes upon the idea of monotheism, meaning that there is an all powerful, ubiquitous, that means ever present, timeless, nameless, ageless, sexless God, who has created the universe, sustains it, and will destroy it. ठीक है? फर्दर और क्या कैरेक्टरिस्टिक्स हैं उपनिषदिक थॉट के? Is it a reaction against a protest movement against Brahmanism or not? At the same time, is it not an effort to reform Brahmanism? Yes. At the same time, it is also a Kshatriya response to Brahmanism. Right? देखते हैं कैसे. It was reformative and Protestant. It was an attempt by Brahmanism to reform itself in response to the challenge posed by other heterodox sects such as Buddhism and Jainism. ठीक है? At the same time, it was also a Kshatriya reaction against Brahmanical domination. That is why the earliest Upanishads were composed in the Kshatriya dominated Videha clanish state, clan based Videha state. Further, its content is also distinctly anti-Brahmanism. It rejects the social hierarchy established by Brahmanism, Brahmin Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, Shudras. It also rejects the idea that of ritualism as rituals as the path to salvation, etc. It puts forward the idea that instead of ritualism, this क्या बोलते हैं, knowledge is the path to salvation, right? So in this way it was both an effort to reform Brahmanism to protect it against Buddhism and Jainism, and also a Kshatriya reaction against Brahmanical domination in order to resolve the conflict going on between these two groups in favor of the Kshatriyas. So some of the scholars associated with the Upanishadic thought were Kshatriyas, others were Brahmins. Clear? ये हो गए इसके features. Now let us look at the significance of Upanishadic thought. बताइए जी, क्या है significance Upanishadic thought का? First of all, it provided an ideological alternative to Brahmanism. Write down. It provided an ideological alternative to Brahmanism. Secondly, Upanishadic thought represents the high water mark of heterodox philosophy in India. It represents the final stage of the evolution of, orthodox philosophy. Brahmanical philosophy in India. क्या क्या देखने के लिए मिलता है हमें? Earliest kind of Brahmanical philosophy was Sankhya. Then Nyaya. Then Yoga. Then Vaisheshika. Then Mimamsa. And finally Vedant, also known as Upanishad. ठीक है? So this was the peak of orthodox Indian philosophy, traditional Indian thought. Further, it also played an important role in the emergence of Buddhism also. How? Many of its ideas were borrowed by Buddhism, right? So you can write down. It also played an important role in the emergence of Buddhism. In the emergence of Buddhism. ये दो वे में किया है इसने. First of all, many of the Upanishadic thoughts were borrowed by Buddhism. ठीक है? And secondly, क्या किया? It was the earliest to attack the Brahmanical social order and the Brahmanical religious practices. Thus, it softened the ground for the emergence of Buddhism. Had Buddhism emerged without no Upanishadic thought, तो क्या होता? Reaction against it would have been extremely strong and it may not have been allowed to flourish. तो सब पॉइंट्स लिखो. It first क्या लिखा आपने? अच्छा वो लिख लिया. हाँ, नेक्स्ट सब पॉइंट लिखो. सेकेंडली it prepared the ground for Buddhism by attacking and weakening Brahmanism from within. ठीक है? नेक्स्ट लिखो. It also represented a timely response to the prevailing socio-economic and political problems. Had this response not come, would the society, polity and economy have been able to survive? नहीं, उसके अगेंस्ट एक बहुत वायलेंट रिएक्शन होता. But since it was able to provide this timely response, it was able to induce evolution of the society, polity and economy, and this contributed to the continuity of Indian culture right from the Vedic age. ठीक है? Therefore, it played an important role in ensuring the continuity of Vedic culture in India. Now, while the Upanishads represent the high water mark of traditional Indian philosophy, did philosophical development stop in the future, or did they continue? They continued. In fact, the Upanishads became the basis for future philosophical development. Write down. The Upanishads also became the basis for future philosophical development. It was on the basis of Upanishadic thought that in the early 8th century, Shankaracharya आदि शंकराचार्य हैं, ठीक है. शंकराचार्य would give the Vedant philosophy, Advait philosophy, ठीक है. And later several other acharyas such as Ramanujacharya, Vallabhacharya, Madhavacharya, would continue the intellectual tradition to put forward philosophies such as Shuddha Advait, to put forward philosophies such as this qualified monoism, Shuddha Advait, Dvait Advait, etc. ठीक है. विशिष्ट अद्वैत, शुद्ध अद्वैत, द्वैत अद्वैत. So it, you can say that the Upanishadic thought became the platform for future philosophical development. अभी क्या लिखा है आपने? हाँ, तो you can write down, वो लाइन हटा दो. Write down. Philosophers such as Shankaracharya, Ramanujacharya, Vallabhacharya, and Madhavacharya would build upon the philosophical legacy of the Upanishads. Madhavacharya would build upon the philosophical legacy of the Upanishads. एंड इसकी वजह से अल्टीमेटली होगा क्या? एक नया कल्चरल मूवमेंट इंडिया में इमर्ज होगा. सो दे आर इन फैक्ट द कॉमन लिंक बिटवीन द हाईली फिलोसॉफिकल उपनिषदिक थॉट एंड द हाईली डिवोशनल भक्ति. ठीक है, तो इनके एक साइड पे है उपनिषद्स देयर वर्क एक्ट्स एज अ प्रिज्म, और दूसरी साइड पे क्या निकल के आता है? भक्ति, मेडिवल भक्ति। ठीक है। philosophical legacy of the Upanishads, and in fact act as the common link between the Upanishads, between the high philosophy of the Upanishads, and bhakti, ठीक है, and bhakti. Is this much clear? Now look, bhakti would later emerge as the most popular cultural and religious movement in the whole of India. इसका philosophical basis क्या है? यही Upanishads, and its association with bhakti would allow the further propagation of Upanishadic thought throughout Indian consciousness. So if you are to ask modern Hindu उसके philosophical beliefs क्या है, so it is going to be the same as those given in the Upanishads, and it is because it was able to evolve over time. It was able to adapt with the changing times. ठीक है, write down next point लिखो. Therefore Upanishadic thought was able to deeply permeate the fabric of Indian society. Clear? तो ये हो गया the Upanishadic thought, and now एक debate. क्या? Is Buddhism repackaged version of Upanishadic thought? This view has been expressed by colonial historians such as Vincent Smith. क्या बोला इन्होंने कि Buddhism borrows extremely heavily from Upanishadic thought. Its crux is also the same, and therefore it is the same set of thoughts presented in a different manner. ठीक है. Now, what is the basis of this claim? He has tried to highlight the similarities between Upanishads and Buddhism. ठीक है. क्या सिमिलैरिटीज पॉइंट आउट करेंगे ये? फर्स्ट ऑफ ऑल, both Buddhism as well as Upanishadic thought emerged in the similar context, in the same socio-political and economic environment, and they were trying to address the same set of problems. Okay, so write down. According to him, both were the products of the socio-economic, political, and religious. Both were the product of the same set of socio-economic, political, and religious changes induced by the second urbanization. Secondly, he has also highlighted that they share some core concepts with each other, core ideas. Write down. According to him, both share the same core concepts, such as rebirth and karma. Such as rebirth and karma. Ultimate objective for both is the same. Kya? Salvation. Write down. For both, the ultimate objective is salvation, which is also defined in the same manner. That is, freedom from the cycle of birth and rebirth. The ultimate objective for both is salvation and is also defined in the same manner. Okay? Both of them are against ritualism and priestly domination. Both of them deny the efficacy of rituals and priestly intervention. Similarly, next point, write down. Both emphasize upon renunciation and non-violence. Towards both humans and animals. ठीक है? Both emphasize upon what? Establishing a direct relationship with God, or establishing not direct relationship with God, rather both of them emphasize upon the importance of individual effort in attaining salvation. ठीक है? Both emphasize on individual effort and personal experience as the key to salvation. दूसरी साइड पे क्या है? However, later historians have challenged this idea strongly. Full stop. They highlight the glaring dissimilarities between these philosophical systems. लिखो वन बाय वन. फॉर एग्जाम्पल, while Buddhism rejects the infallibility of the Vedas, Upanishadic thought is itself an extension of the Vedas. In fact, Vedic knowledge is considered to be the worldview. Vedic knowledge is considered to be the key to salvation. Vedas, full stop. In fact, Vedic knowledge is considered to be the key to salvation. Okay? Second लिखो. Buddhism completely rejects the Brahmanical worldview. With regards to Varna, caste, untouchability, women, and social hierarchy. Next point. Whereas the Upanishads, in a sense, seek to defend it. Seek to defend it. ठीक है? While next main point number 3, while Buddhism rejects the ideas of Atma and Brahma, these ideas are central to Upanishadic philosophy. These ideas are central to Upanishadic philosophy. The path to salvation is also different in both. For Buddhism, the path to salvation, for Buddhism, the path to salvation lies in ending desire, while for the Upanishads, ending desire, while for the Upanishads, it could be obtained by ending ignorance. Ending ignorance, acquiring knowledge, है ना, ज्ञान मार्ग. The concept of salvation is also treated differently in both of them. ठीक है? So for Buddhism, salvation can be attained by following the eightfold path, right? So it emphasizes upon individual agency and a dynamic self. That means an individual through his own efforts trying to dynamically change his future, okay, with the power of his own karmas. Whereas in Upanishads, path to salvation कैसा होता है? Inner reflection into a static self. वो डायनामिक चेंज नहीं करने की जरूरत है, केवल रियलाइजेशन की जरूरत है, राइट? क्या क्या? हाँ, अभी लिखा क्या आपने? हाँ, तो इसके पहले ना एक छोटा सा फ्रेज और ऐड कर लो, एक लाइन और ऐड कर लो. द स्टडी ऑफ सैल्वेशन, द स्टडी ऑफ सैल्वेशन is also different in both. Full stop. While Buddhism focuses upon, आगे क्या लिखा है? Buddhism emphasizes upon individual agency and a dynamic self, or karma and a dynamic self. Upanishads emphasize upon inner reflection into a static self. ठीक है, नेक्स्ट लिखो. देखो, both Buddhism as well as Jainism emphasized upon renunciation, है ना? दोनों ने बोला कि संन्यास लेना जरूरी है, घर छोड़ना जरूरी है. Leave your worldly affairs. In fact, both of them prescribed this. However, those who had access to salvation, to sannyas ashram, differed for both. Buddhism में कोई restrictions थे? नहीं, there were no restrictions on the basis of caste or varna or gender, etc. But within Upanishads, sannyas would be regulated by varna ashram dharma system. So write down. In Buddhism, renunciation was not regulated by varna, caste or gender. But this is not the case. But this is not the case for the Upanishads. Where sannyas was regulated on the basis of varnashram dharma. On the basis of varnashram dharma. ठीक है? And lastly, कितने हुए? 6. lastly लिखो. While Buddhism was spread through proselytization and conversion. Proselytization and conversion, that means propagation or preaching and conversion. Upanishads remained silent on religious conversion. Why? Because that would require convincing people to participate in a highly complicated philosophical exercise. जो कॉन्सेप्ट है इनर रियलाइजेशन का वही समझ में नहीं आता है, हाउ टू डू दैट वो तो भूल ही जाओ. ठीक है. सो बुद्धिज्म हाउएवर ऑन द अदर हैंड वाज एक्सट्रीमली प्रैक्टिकल. बोला कि केवल ये 8 चीजें करनी है, डू दीज थिंग्स एंड यू कैन अटेन सैल्वेशन. क्लियर? So on the basis of this, would it be correct to say that Buddhism is simply a repackaged version of Upanishadic thought? No. While there were similarities between the two, we can say that Buddhism may have taken inspiration from Upanishadic thought, but is a distinct philosophy unto itself. Okay? Write down. Next main point. Therefore, it becomes clear that while Buddhism was inspired by Upanishadic thought, it displayed a high degree of philosophical innovation. Thus, it should be considered as an entirely new school of thought. Right? चलिए, ये हो गया हमारा बुद्धिज्म एज वेल एज उपनिषदिक थॉट. नेक्स्ट वील हैव टू स्टार्ट विद मॉडर्न एज. वो अब कल की क्लास में करते हैं. ठीक है. कोई डाउट्स हो तो प्लीज लेट मी नो. मैं ये पीडीएफ अभी अपलोड करवा देता हूँ स्लाइड्स की. शुभ रनल. ठीक है. कोई डाउट्स हैं क्या? हाँ बताइए. क्लास टाइमिंग कब से सुबह मूव होगा? आई एम ऑल्सो नॉट एंटायरली सर्टेन अबाउट दैट. एक्चुअली इंस्टीट्यूट के ऊपर वाले फ्लोर पर कुछ कंस्ट्रक्शन चल रहा था, तो दैट इज व्हाई वी हैड टू मूव द टाइमिंग टू इवनिंग. दे हैड प्रॉमिस कि 15 दिन के अंदर कर देंगे, बट इट इज टेकिंग अ लिटिल बिट एक्स्ट्रा टाइम. सो आई विल हैव टू आस्क एंड लेट यू नो. इवन आई एम कंसर्न्ड अबाउट दिस कि सुबह क्लास नहीं हो पा रही है. हमने शुरुआत में तो यही टाइम अनाउंस किया था 8 बजे से, बट अभी तक नहीं हो पाया है. आई एम श्योर कि अब वो दे मस्ट बी फिनिशिंग अप देयर वर्क. एक्सपेक्टेशन तो ये था कि मतलब 2 days बैक कि हो जाना चाहिए था, लेकिन अभी तक नहीं हो पाया है. तो इट मस्ट बी इन दी फाइनल स्टेजेस नाउ. ठीक है. हाँ. ठीक है, ठीक है, देखते हैं. आई आस्क, एक बार दोबारा पूछते तो क्लियर होगा थोड़ा. ऑलराइट देन. थैंक यू. कल मिलते हैं फिर.